My sister warned me not to interfere with her new boyfriend, but when my nephew showed up at my door covered in bruises, I did what she never had the courage to do. I know this sounds dramatic, but the moment everything started was the night I got a voicemail from my 10-year-old nephew Ethan. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was half asleep on my couch with the TV still murmuring in the background. Ethan almost never called me on his own, especially not at night, and definitely never left voicemails. He's a quiet kid, sweet and careful with his words, the kind who always asks permission before doing anything. So hearing his voice trembling through the speakers made me bolt upright. The message was short, barely audible, something about needing help and asking if he could come over. I called him back immediately, but he didn't answer. Before I had time to panic, I heard my apartment buzzer ring. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, someone delivering a package to the wrong floor or one of my neighbors forgetting their key again. But when I opened the door downstairs and saw Ethan standing there alone in the hallway, wearing mismatched pajamas and clutching a backpack almost bigger than him, my heart nearly stopped. He wasn't crying exactly, but his eyes were red and swollen like he had been for a while. He didn't say anything when he saw me. He just walked straight into my arms. I didn't even need the hallway lights to see it. Even in the dim yellow glow, I noticed the purple marks around his wrist, the way part of his cheek looked puffy, and how he kept one arm close to his stomach as if shielding it. For a few seconds I couldn't process anything. My mind scrambled to make excuses. Maybe he fell. Maybe he got into a fight at school. Maybe his allergic reactions were acting up again like when he was younger and he'd swell from the weirdest things. But the longer I looked at him, the more I knew none of those excuses made sense. What made it worse was remembering the warning my older sister Megan had thrown at me 2 weeks earlier during a family dinner. She had introduced her new boyfriend, a guy named Travis who was somewhere in his late 30s, all tattoos and dark shirts and a grin that never reached his eyes. Megan had always had questionable taste in men, but this one sent alarms ringing in my head from the second he sat down. Later, when I tried to talk to her privately, she brushed me off with that comment she had repeated more than once: "Do not interfere with my relationship." She had said it like I was some jealous child instead of her younger sibling trying to help. I should have pushed harder then. I keep thinking about that now. The way Travis watched Ethan all evening, not like a parent or even a step-parent in training, but like someone sizing up a stray dog they were forced to adopt. Every time Ethan flinched, Travis would give him this look, a look sharp enough to slice through steel. Megan acted like she didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to notice. So standing there in my apartment with Ethan shaking against me, all I kept hearing in my head was that warning: do not interfere. I took him inside and locked the door behind me. I didn't bombard him with questions. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't do anything except sit down on the couch with him while he curled into my side. It took 10 whole minutes before he spoke, and when he finally did, his voice came out small, the way someone sounds when they know telling the truth might make everything worse. He didn't give details, just fragments. He said things had been bad for a while. He said he had been scared to tell anyone because Travis told him not to bother. He said Megan didn't believe him the last time he tried to say something. He said he didn't know where else to go. I felt something inside me shift then. Something heavy and cold but steady. I had always loved my nephew, always considered myself one of the few adults he felt genuinely safe with. But in that moment, sitting there with his small fingers clutching my shirt like it was the last solid thing he had, I realized what my role needed to be now. His mother might have warned me not to interfere, but she lost that privilege the moment she let a man like Travis anywhere near her child. After Ethan calmed down a little, I asked him where Megan was. He said she was at work, a late shift at the reception desk of a hotel downtown. Travis was home, and that sentence alone made my jaw clench. It meant Ethan had left while Travis was supposed to be watching him. It meant he had run away, and it meant Travis would eventually realize he was gone. I knew I had to call someone, but I also knew I had to be smart. I told Ethan I needed to take photos of his bruises, and he nodded without arguing. He stood there silently while I documented everything, every mark on his arms, every welt along his ribs, the faint imprint of a hand on his shoulder, the kind of things no one could chalk up to childhood clumsiness, the kind of things that could get someone arrested. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady my phone against the wall to keep the photos clear. When I finished, Ethan looked up at me with this terrified sort of hope, like he wanted to believe things were going to get better, but had been disappointed too many times to fully trust it. I pulled him into a hug again and told him he would stay with me tonight no matter what. I didn't know all the next steps yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done staying out of it. The first thing I did after settling Ethan with a blanket and some water was step into the hallway to make a phone call. I knew better than to panic dial Megan in the middle of the night, especially when she was probably still at work and might not answer anyway. And even if she did answer, I doubted she was in a place where she would listen to me. Instead, I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation in careful, measured words, trying to sound calm enough that they would take me seriously, but urgent enough that they would understand I was reporting something that could not wait until morning. The operator asked for photos, descriptions, timelines, everything. They told me an officer would come by within the hour to check on Ethan and take a statement. I felt relief at first, but it quickly turned into something heavier, because I knew once the ball started rolling, there would be no putting it back. There would be investigations, reports, questions Megan would not want to answer, and there would be consequences for Travis, consequences he might try to blame on anyone except himself. When I stepped back inside the apartment, Ethan was sitting exactly where I left him, staring down at his hands like he was trying to disappear. I sat next to him and gently nudged his shoulder. He leaned into me but didn't look up. I didn't push him to talk. Instead, I grabbed a coloring book I kept around for when he visited and slid it toward him. He stared at it for a long moment before picking up a colored pencil and flipping to a blank page. He didn't color. He just held the pencil like it was something familiar, something safe. I watched him while acting like I wasn't. The way his breathing quickened every time he heard a noise from outside the window. The way he kept curling his toes into the couch cushion as if bracing himself for something. The way his shoulders twitched whenever I moved too quickly. These were not reflexes a 10-year-old should have. They were reflexes of someone who learned to expect pain. When the knock finally came at the door, Ethan flinched so hard he nearly dropped the pencil. I put a hand on his back and told him it was okay, that I would be the one to open the door. He nodded and curled into a smaller ball. 2 officers stood in the hallway, a man and a woman, both looking tired but focused. The woman introduced herself first and asked if she could come in. I nodded and stepped aside while the man stayed near the entrance, likely to prevent surprises. The woman approached Ethan carefully, crouching down to his height without touching him. She spoke softly, slowly, the way someone does when they know they are talking to a traumatized child. Ethan barely responded, but he didn't run or freeze, which I took as a small victory. She asked if he was hurt. He nodded. She asked if someone did this to him. He nodded again, this time with his chin trembling. She didn't ask who, not yet. Instead, she asked if he wanted to stay here for the night. Ethan looked at me first before answering, and when he nodded again, I felt something in my chest crack open. The officers documented the photos I had taken, taking their own as well, and wrote down everything I said word for word. They explained the next steps, how they needed to contact Megan, how they needed to send someone to check on Travis immediately, how child services would most likely follow up in the morning. The man asked whether I felt unsafe if Travis came here. I told him honestly that I had no idea what Travis would do, but I knew I wasn't letting him anywhere near Ethan again. After they left, the apartment felt too quiet. Ethan had exhausted himself, mentally and physically, and I let him sleep in my bed while I stayed awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling and trying not to imagine how the call to Megan would go. She loved her son, I knew she did, but love did not always come packaged with clarity, and Megan had always chosen the wrong kind of men, the kind who made promises they never kept, the kind who demanded loyalty before safety, the kind who saw vulnerability as something to exploit. My phone buzzed around 2 a.m., the caller ID told me everything before I even answered. Megan. I stepped into the kitchen so Ethan wouldn't hear and took the call. Her voice was sharp, almost panicked, demanding to know where Ethan was and why the police had called her at work. I tried to explain calmly, but she was too frantic to listen. She kept insisting that I was making things worse, that Travis would never hurt Ethan, that the bruises must have been from sports or roughhousing. She threw excuses like darts, each one missing the board entirely. When I finally told her I had photos, she went silent. The kind of silence that is not thoughtful but defensive. She asked to see Ethan. I told her he was sleeping and that the officers advised he stay with me for the night. She didn't like that, not even a little. She ended the call by repeating the same line she had used before, the line that now sounded like a threat rather than a boundary. Do not interfere. But this time, the words didn't land the way she intended. They didn't scare me or guilt me. They only confirmed that she was not ready to face what was happening. And if she wasn't ready, then I had to be. I stayed awake until sunrise, listening to every rustle and car passing outside, half expecting someone to knock on the door again. When Ethan woke up and shuffled sleepily into the living room, I made him breakfast and tried to act normal. He ate without saying much, but at least he ate. That felt like progress. By the time child services arrived later that morning, I had fully accepted the role I needed to play now. If Megan wasn't going to protect her son, then I would. I just had no idea how complicated that would become. Child services arrived mid-morning in a quiet, almost gentle way, as if they were trying not to spook the air inside my apartment. A woman named Denise introduced herself, and she spoke with the kind of steady calm you only find in people who deal with the worst parts of humanity on a daily basis. She asked if she could sit with Ethan first, alone, and though the idea made my stomach twist, I agreed. I stayed in the kitchen, close enough to overhear muffled tones, but distant enough that he could talk freely. Each minute stretched on like a small eternity. When they finally came out, Ethan looked tired but strangely lighter, like he had been holding his breath for weeks and finally exhaled. Denise asked me a series of questions after that: my relationship to Ethan, my living situation, my background, whether I had ever been investigated for anything, whether I had the capacity to keep him temporarily safe. I answered everything honestly. She seemed satisfied. Then her tone shifted slightly as she told me they had attempted to contact Megan again and that she needed to meet them in person. If she refused, things would escalate. If she complied, they would do a wellness interview and determine next steps. She made it very clear that the bruises were consistent with abuse, not accidental injury. Hearing it stated plainly like that, abuse, hit me harder than I expected. I had known it, but part of me still clung to denial. Knowing and accepting are two different things. While all of this unfolded, Ethan sat quietly on the couch watching us with those cautious, tired eyes. I kept glancing over, trying to give him silent reassurance. He didn't speak, but he didn't retreat into himself either, which I took as a good sign. When Denise left, she told me they might come back later in the day, depending on how Megan responded. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, an uneasy heaviness settled over the apartment. I wanted to distract Ethan, maybe put on a movie or play a game, but he seemed too drained to engage in anything. So instead, I sat beside him and let the silence be comfortable. It felt like the first moment of stillness since the night before. I would have given anything for that calm to last. Around noon, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was Denise again, but the name on the screen made my jaw tighten. Travis. He had never had my number before, so Megan must have given it to him. My pulse spiked as I considered answering. If I ignored him, he might get angrier. If I picked up, I had no idea what he would say. But the decision made itself when Ethan looked up at me, fear coloring his face even though he had not seen the screen. I declined the call. Then I blocked the number. 2 minutes later, someone started hammering on the door. The sound was so sudden and violent that Ethan jumped up and nearly tripped backward over the couch. I stood immediately, putting myself between him and the hallway. The pounding continued, followed by a muffled voice I recognized instantly even though I had never heard it in person. Travis. The tone was ugly, the kind of voice that demanded to be obeyed, the kind of voice that carried no remorse and no hesitation. I told Ethan to go into my bedroom and to lock the door. He ran without questioning. When I heard the latch click shut, I finally exhaled. I approached the front door slowly and checked the peephole. Travis stood there, red-faced, hair messy, pacing like a caged animal. He kept smacking his hand on the doorframe, yanking at the handle even though it was obviously locked. I didn't open it. I didn't even speak. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I explained who was outside and why I felt unsafe. The dispatcher told me officers were already in the area on related calls and would arrive shortly. I kept my voice as steady as I could manage. Meanwhile, Travis kept shouting, demanding Megan, demanding Ethan, demanding his property back. Property. He had used that exact word about a child. After a few minutes, he switched tactics. He tried pretending he was calm. He said he just wanted to talk. He said Ethan was overreacting. He said I misunderstood everything. He said Megan would back him up. His voice softened, but the desperation underneath made it even more disturbing. When I still didn't answer, the mask slipped again. He started threatening to break down the door. That was the longest minute of my life, standing there with nothing but a lock between us. But then, like relief wrapped in sirens, I heard the approaching patrol car. Travis must have heard it too because he bolted down the hallway like a startled animal. I watched him disappear around the corner. The officers who arrived were not the same ones from the night before. They took statements, scanned the area, and assured me they would locate Travis. They also confirmed that Megan had finally responded to child services and was on her way to a meeting with them. I nodded, unsure whether that was good or bad news. When they left, I called Ethan out of the bedroom. He emerged slowly, eyes wide, shoulders tight. Even though the danger had passed for the moment, the fear lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. I pulled him into a hug. His small frame felt fragile in a way that made anger burn hot in my chest. No child should feel hunted in their own family. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange haze. I kept expecting another knock, another phone call, another moment where everything spiraled. Instead, things stayed eerily quiet. Too quiet. I tried to make normal conversation with Ethan, but he seemed exhausted beyond words. Eventually, he curled up on the couch and fell asleep again. That was when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Megan. It said only 3 words: "We need to talk." And even though it was vague, even though she had said similar things before, something about the way she wrote it told me that everything was about to get far more complicated. When Megan finally arrived at my apartment that evening, she didn't knock gently or call ahead. She buzzed the intercom once, then again, then held it down like she was leaning her entire body weight against the button. I hesitated before letting her in. Part of me wanted to make her wait outside until the police or child services could join us, but another part of me knew that if I didn't talk to her now, the situation might spiral even further out of control. As soon as I opened the door, she rushed in without invitation. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and she looked like she had aged 5 years in a single day. She scanned the apartment frantically, as if expecting Travis to materialize from behind the furniture or Ethan to leap out of hiding. I stood in front of the hallway, blocking her view of the bedroom where he was resting. She asked where he was. Her voice cracked slightly, but I couldn't tell whether it was from fear, guilt, or anger. Maybe all 3. I told her he was safe. I didn't tell her where exactly. I didn't trust her enough for that. Not yet, she launched into an explanation before I even asked for one. She said child services had contacted her, that she had already attended the meeting, that they were concerned, that they wanted her to consider a temporary separation until things were sorted out. She said the words with a strained bitterness, like she still couldn't believe they dared to challenge her choices. Then she started crying. It was messy and uneven, not the clean, controlled crying she sometimes used to guilt people during arguments. This was different. She kept wiping her face, but the tears returned faster than she could push them away. I tried to stay calm, to stay grounded, because someone had to. I asked her why she had ignored my warnings, why she had defended Travis again and again, why she had let things escalate to the point where her son was showing up on my doorstep covered in bruises. She flinched at the word bruises. She whispered that Travis had explained everything, that he said Ethan was lying, that he claimed the marks came from falling off his bike, that he had convinced her she was being dramatic and paranoid. And for a moment, I saw it, the cycle she had allowed herself to fall into, the excuses, the minimization, the self-blame, the desperate belief that the man she chose couldn't possibly be the monster everyone else saw. I understood it, even if I didn't forgive it. But then she said something that nearly snapped the fragile patience I was clinging to. She claimed that I had filled Ethan's head with fear, that I had turned him against Travis, that I had made the situation worse by intervening. I stepped toward her, not aggressively, but firmly enough that she stopped talking. I told her that Ethan had come to me because he was terrified, that he had shown up with injuries no child should ever have, that he had asked me not to tell his mother because he feared punishment. I told her that whether she realized it or not, she had chosen her boyfriend over her own child, and that Ethan had reached a breaking point long before he showed up on my doorstep. She crumbled again, quieter this time, sitting on the arm of the couch like her knees wouldn't support her weight anymore. She whispered that she didn't know what to do. She said she still loved Travis, but she also loved her son and she was afraid of losing both. Her voice trembled as she told me she felt trapped, that she didn't know how things got this bad. I told her she needed to choose Ethan now, not tomorrow, not next week, not after another argument or another apology from Travis. Now, for the first time since she walked in, she actually listened. She asked to see him. I paused. I told her he was sleeping, which was true. I also told her that she could see him only if she promised not to wake him or take him anywhere. She hesitated, but she agreed. When I opened the bedroom door, Ethan was curled up under the blanket, clutching the same small stuffed dinosaur he had brought in his backpack. His breathing was steady, peaceful. For the first time that day, he didn't look scared. Megan covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming again. She walked closer, slowly, as if afraid her steps would disturb the air around him. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched him, shoulders trembling. She whispered apologies he couldn't hear, promises he wouldn't be awake to process. I watched her closely, ready to intervene if she tried anything impulsive, but she didn't. She just cried quietly beside her son. Eventually, she stood and followed me back into the hallway. She said she needed help. She said she knew she couldn't go back to Travis. She said she would cooperate with child services. She said she wanted to fix things with Ethan. For once, her voice wasn't defensive or angry or desperate. It was tired, honest, heavy with acceptance. I nodded and told her that was the only path forward. As we walked back to the living room, another knock came at the door. This time I didn't tense. It was Denise from Child Services, right on time for the follow-up she had mentioned earlier. She stepped inside, and after a brief conversation, she spoke directly to Megan, outlining the next steps. Temporary placement, counseling, mandatory supervision, a protection plan. Megan agreed to all of it. Later that night, after Denise left with Megan to arrange safe housing and begin the legal process, my apartment felt unusually silent. Ethan slept deeply, unaware of the tidal shift that had just occurred in his life. I sat on the couch, exhausted, drained, but strangely relieved. For the first time in months, the horizon didn't look like a storm. This wasn't a clean ending. It wasn't a neat box tied with a bow. There would be hearings, evaluations, therapy, rebuilding, and countless conversations. But the cycle had been broken. The truth had been forced into the light. The right people were finally involved, and Ethan was safe. That alone made everything worth it.